Grieve, pack your bags and never come back, my daughter-in-law whispered to me at my son's funeral, her voice steady, almost annoyed, as if she were reminding me to return a borrowed dish instead of dismissing me from my own child's life. The wind that morning moved slowly across the cemetery in Hartford, Connecticut, lifting the edges of black coats and carrying the faint scent of freshly turned earth. I stood beside the polished mahogany casket that held my only son, Daniel Whitmore, and for a moment I wondered if I had misheard her. The minister had just finished speaking about Daniel's generosity, about his laugh that filled a room, about the way he never forgot a birthday. Family friends were still dabbing their eyes with tissues. And there she was, Ashley, standing close enough that no one else could hear her, telling me to mourn quickly and disappear. I did not answer her. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply looked at her, really looked at her, as if I were seeing her for the first time in the 15 years she had been married to my son. Her mascara was flawless. Her posture perfect. Not a trace of grief in her eyes, only impatience. At 72, I have learned that silence unsettles people more than outrage ever could. So I gave her silence. Daniel had been 39 when he passed. Too young, everyone said. Too kind. Too needed. I had buried my husband 10 years earlier, and I thought that was the heaviest sorrow a heart could hold. I was wrong. Losing a child rearranges something inside you. It hollows you out in places you did not know existed. As the final prayer was spoken and the mourners began to step forward with single white roses, I kept my back straight. My gloved hands did not tremble. If Ashley expected a scene, she was disappointed. When the service ended, she slipped her arm through my nephew's and guided him away, already discussing the reception at the country club as if it were a brunch reservation. I remained by the casket for one last moment. You will always have a place here, Mom, Daniel used to tell me whenever I hesitated to visit. He had said it just 3 months ago, standing in the kitchen of the colonial house he and Ashley bought 2 years back, the one with the wide front porch and the maple tree in the yard. I could still hear his voice. I could still see the way he would squeeze my shoulder when he said it. That house was not just wood and drywall to me. It was Sunday dinners, birthday candles, and the sound of my grandson's sneakers racing down the hallway. And now, according to Ashley, it was no longer my place to enter. After the burial, we gathered in the reception hall. Silver trays of finger sandwiches and coffee were set along linen-covered tables. People approached me with soft words and careful hugs. I thanked each of them. I listened to stories about Daniel's college years, about the fishing trip he once took to Lake George, about the way he volunteered at the food pantry every Thanksgiving. Ashley stayed across the room, smiling tightly, accepting condolences as though she alone carried the title of widow. At one point she caught my eye and gave me a look that was not cruel, not loud, just final. Pack your bags. Never come back. She had already decided where I belonged. I sipped my coffee and let it settle warm in my chest. Grief makes many people impulsive. It makes them lash out, sell houses too quickly, sign papers without reading the fine print. But grief has made me something else. It has made me patient. When the last guest left and the staff began clearing plates, Ashley approached me again. I'll have Daniel's things sorted this week, she said briskly. It's better if we all move forward. We all. I nodded once. Of course, I replied. My voice did not shake. She mistook that calm for surrender. Most people do. They see a gray-haired woman in a black dress and assume she has no fight left in her. They assume that because she folds her gloves carefully and thanks the valet, she is ready to fade quietly into whatever corner they assign her. They assume wrong. I walked out of that reception hall alone, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. I did not look back at Ashley. I did not argue. I did not plead. I simply opened my car door, sat behind the wheel, and allowed myself one long steady breath. They believed they had already written the final chapter of my story. They believed that burying my son meant burying my place in his life. But as I started the engine and pulled onto the quiet Connecticut road, I knew something they did not. Grief may have bent me, but it had not erased me. And I was not finished yet. I did not return to my own house that night. Instead, I drove to the small condominium Daniel had insisted I keep after my husband passed away. A quiet place just 15 minutes from his neighborhood. The building overlooked the Connecticut River, and at night the water reflected the streetlights in long trembling lines. I carried my overnight bag inside and placed it on the kitchen counter, then stood there listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a train crossing the bridge. Grief followed me into every room, but it no longer felt wild. It felt watchful. The next morning I woke before sunrise, as I always do. Habit is a comfort when everything else feels unstable. I brewed coffee and sat by the window with Daniel's watch in my hand, turning it over slowly. He had given it to himself after his first major promotion, proud that he could finally afford something engraved with his initials. Daniel Whitmore. The letters were small but precise. I remembered the day he showed it to me, laughing because he said it made him feel like a responsible adult. That memory did not break me. It steadied me. By mid-morning my phone rang. It was Mrs. Collins from next door to Daniel's house. She had lived there for over 20 years and had watched my son grow into the man he became. "Margaret dear, I just wanted to check on you," she said gently. I thanked her. There was a pause before she added, "I noticed movers pulling into Ashley's driveway earlier. I thought it seemed quick." I stared at the river outside my window. "Movers?" I repeated evenly. "Yes, a large truck. They have been carrying boxes out since 8 o'clock. I did not react aloud. I simply thanked her again and ended the call. I set my coffee mug down carefully, making sure it did not clatter against the glass table. Movers arrive when decisions have already been made. I drove back to the house without haste. The sky was bright and clear, the kind of early autumn day that usually invites long walks and open windows. When I turned onto Daniel Street, the truck was impossible to miss. 2 men in blue uniforms were carrying framed artwork down the front steps. I parked along the curb and stepped out. Ashley stood on the porch holding a clipboard. She looked almost efficient, as if she were organizing a charity event rather than dismantling a home. She saw me and stiffened. "You should have called," she said immediately. I climbed the steps one at a time. "Mrs. Collins mentioned the truck," I replied. My tone remained calm. One of the movers passed between us carrying a box labeled office. I recognized Daniel's handwriting on the side. I glanced at Ashley. "Are you relocating?" I asked. She lifted her chin slightly. "It is time for a fresh start," she answered. "There is no reason to keep everything." Everything. The word settled heavily between us. Daniel valued stability, I said quietly. Especially for his son. My grandson Liam was 7 years old. He had spent countless afternoons building forts in the living room and chasing leaves in the backyard. Ashley's expression flickered for a brief second. "Liam will adjust," she said. "Children do." I nodded slowly, as though considering her statement. Inside something sharpened. I walked past her into the foyer. The family photographs had already been removed from the walls. Pale rectangles marked where they had hung. The air felt hollow, stripped. In the dining room, a stack of folders rested on the table. One had slipped open slightly. I could see printed documents inside, official and formal. Ashley followed me in. "Margaret, this is not necessary," she said. "Daniel trusted me to handle things." I turned toward her, meeting her gaze without anger. "Daniel trusted many people," I replied. "Including me." She opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it. The movers continued their steady rhythm. Footsteps crossing hardwood floors. The low murmur of instructions exchanged. Nothing chaotic. Nothing violent. Just the quiet dismantling of a life. I placed my hand on the back of a dining chair and let my fingers rest there. I did not stop the movers. I did not demand explanations. Instead I observed. The addresses on the boxes. The direction of the truck. The urgency in Ashley's movements. Grief had taken my son. It had not taken my ability to see. And what I was beginning to see was not just loss. It was intention. The movers worked for another hour before the truck doors finally slammed shut. I stood in the foyer and listened to the engine start, then fade as it turned the corner at the end of the street. The house felt altered, as if someone had lowered the ceiling by a few inches. Ashley walked through the living room with her clipboard, checking off items in neat, decisive strokes. "The larger furniture will stay for now," she said without looking at me. "I have not decided what to do with it." I noticed the way she used the word I, not we. Not the family. I stepped into Daniel's office. The desk was cleared except for a single framed photograph that had been overlooked. It was from 5 years ago, taken on the 4th of July. Daniel stood between Ashley and me, holding Liam on his shoulders while fireworks bloomed behind us. I picked up the frame and studied his smile. It was open, unguarded. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who believes the future is secure. He loved this room, I said quietly. Ashley paused at the doorway. It is just a room, she replied. We cannot live in the past. I placed the photograph into my purse beside his watch. The past built this house, I answered. She did not respond. Instead she turned and walked down the hallway, her heels tapping lightly against the hardwood floor. I followed at a measured pace. In Liam's bedroom, cardboard boxes were stacked neatly near the closet. His bookshelf was half empty. A small baseball glove lay on the bedspread, forgotten. I sat on the edge of the bed and ran my hand across the quilt I had sewn for him when he was born. Navy and white squares stitched together by patient hands. Ashley leaned against the doorframe. We are moving closer to my sister, she said. It will be easier for everyone. I looked up at her. Did Daniel agree to that plan? The question was simple, but it settled heavily in the room. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. We discussed many possibilities, she answered. I nodded slowly. Discussion is not the same as agreement. I stood and walked toward the closet. On the top shelf sat a small, wooden box Daniel had kept since childhood. I reached for it instinctively. Ashley stepped forward. I will sort through that, she said quickly. I met her eyes. That box was here long before you were, I replied. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. She stepped back. I took the box and opened it. Inside were old report cards, a faded photograph of Daniel at 8 years old holding a science fair ribbon, and a folded letter addressed to me in his handwriting. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded it. The letter was short, written 2 years ago on Mother's Day. He thanked me for teaching him resilience, for showing him that strength does not have to be loud to be real. You always see further than the rest of us, he had written. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back inside the box. Ashley watched in silence. You should not take too much, she said finally. It will complicate things. I closed the lid gently. Complications often reveal what is important, I replied. She inhaled as if preparing to argue, then seemed to reconsider. The house echoed differently now. Each footstep carried farther. Each room felt less like a home and more like a transaction waiting to be completed. I walked back toward the living room and stood by the window, looking out at the maple tree. The leaves were brighter than yesterday, catching the afternoon sun. Change happens gradually until it does not. Ashley approached once more. Margaret, I know this is difficult, she said, her tone almost rehearsed. But I need space to manage everything. I turned to face her fully. Space is not the same as authority, I said calmly. And managing is not the same as owning. Her jaw tightened. Daniel trusted me, she repeated. I held her gaze steady and unblinking. Daniel trusted his mother too. The silence that followed was not explosive. It was measured, the kind of silence that carries weight. I slipped the wooden box under my arm and walked toward the front door. I did not slam it behind me. I did not threaten or accuse. I simply stepped out onto the porch and breathed in the cool Connecticut air. The maple leaves rustled softly above me. Ashley believed she was reorganizing a life. I understood she was exposing one, and every detail she revealed brought me closer to the truth she had not yet considered. The air outside Daniel's house felt cooler than it had just an hour earlier, as if the season itself had shifted while I stood on that porch. I walked down the steps slowly, the wooden box tucked securely beneath my arm, and paused beside my car without immediately opening the door. The neighborhood looked unchanged. A sprinkler rotated lazily across a neighbor's lawn. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. It struck me how quietly a family can unravel, while the world continues without interruption. I did not drive away right away. Instead I sat behind the steering wheel and opened the wooden box again, reading Daniel's letter one more time. You always see further than the rest of us. The sentence lingered in my mind. Seeing further does not require shouting. It requires patience. That afternoon, rather than returning to my condominium, I drove downtown to a brick building on Main Street that I had not visited in several months. Harrison Blake had been my husband's attorney for nearly 30 years. He had handled our estate planning, Daniel's first trust account, and every revision that followed. The brass plaque beside the entrance still bore his name in modest lettering. I stepped inside and was greeted by the faint scent of paper and polished wood. The receptionist recognized me immediately and offered a sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Blake can see you in a few minutes," she said gently. I nodded and took a seat in the waiting area. The chairs were upholstered in deep green fabric, the same shade Daniel once said reminded him of stability. When Harrison emerged from his office, his expression softened further. "Margaret," he said warmly, extending his hand, "I was planning to call you next week." I followed him into his office and closed the door behind me. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of carefully labeled binders. "Order. Structure. Clarity. Ashley has hired movers," I said calmly as I took my seat. Harrison did not look surprised. Instead, he folded his hands on the desk. "I suspected she might move quickly," he replied. I watched him closely. "On what authority?" I asked. He leaned back slightly, choosing his words with care. "Daniel updated several documents last year," he said. "Some of them involve shared interests." Shared. The word settled firmly in my chest. Harrison opened a file drawer and retrieved a thick folder bearing Daniel's name. He did not rush. He never did. "Your son believed in balance," he continued. "He wanted to ensure that no one person could make unilateral decisions regarding the primary residence." I felt my breathing steady further. "Meaning?" I prompted quietly. Harrison slid a document across the desk toward me. "The property is held in joint ownership," he explained. "Ashley cannot sell it, lease it, or relocate permanent assets without your written consent." I studied the page, recognizing Daniel's signature at the bottom. The date was from 8 months ago. 8 months. He had been planning carefully. Harrison observed my reaction. "He anticipated tension," he said gently. I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Daniel knew me well," I replied. Harrison nodded. "There is also a provision regarding Liam," he added. Educational and residential stability were priorities in his estate planning. I closed the folder slowly. The house Ashley was reorganizing so confidently was not hers to command. Not entirely. "Has she requested a copy of the updated documents?" I asked. Harrison shook his head. "Not yet." I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket. "Then let us not rush to enlighten her," I said evenly. Harrison's eyes held a flicker of understanding. "As you wish," he answered. When I stepped back onto Main Street, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. I felt no triumph, no dramatic surge of victory. What I felt was alignment, the quiet confirmation that patience is not weakness. Ashley believed she was closing doors behind me. She did not realize that some doors required 2 keys, and I had never misplaced mine. That evening I did not call Ashley. I did not mention the meeting with Harrison. I did not hint that I now understood more than she assumed. Instead, I returned to my condominium by the river and prepared a simple dinner: grilled chicken and steamed green beans, the kind of meal Daniel used to tease me about because he said I measured seasoning the way I measured life, carefully and without waste. I ate at the small oak table by the window and watched the water move slowly in the fading light. Grief still sat across from me like an uninvited guest, but it no longer controlled the conversation. After washing the dishes, I opened my desk drawer and took out a leather-bound planner. I began making notes. Dates, times, observations, the arrival of the movers, the removal of specific items, the mention of relocating closer to Ashley's sister. Documentation does not require confrontation. It requires consistency. The next morning I drove back to Daniel's house at 10 o'clock, precisely when I knew Liam would be at school and Ashley would likely be home coordinating details. The moving truck was gone. The driveway looked bare without it. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. That detail mattered. Ashley opened the door after a few seconds. Her expression shifted when she saw me, but she stepped aside without comment. "I came to discuss logistics," I said evenly as I entered. She folded her arms. There is not much to discuss, she replied. The house will be listed within the month. I removed my gloves slowly, placing them on the console table where the family photographs had once stood. That will not be possible without my consent, I said calmly. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Ashley blinked once as though she had misheard me. Your consent, she repeated. I met her gaze without hostility. Daniel and I structured the property in joint ownership, I explained. Any decision regarding sale or permanent relocation requires both signatures. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences between us. This one carried recalculation. That is not what Daniel told me, she said, her tone tightening. Daniel believed in balance, I replied. He ensured it. Ashley's jaw set. You are making this harder than it needs to be, she said. I walked into the living room and sat in Daniel's armchair, resting my hands lightly on the blanket draped over it. No, Ian suarat quietly. I am preventing unnecessary mistakes. She paced once across the hardwood floor, then stopped. Liam needs stability, she insisted. And I decide what that looks like. I looked at her steadily. Stability was precisely Daniel's concern, I said. Which is why he established shared authority. The words were factual, not emotional. Ashley turned toward the kitchen, perhaps searching for something to anchor her position. I have already spoken with a real estate agent, she said over her shoulder. Preliminary conversations are not binding, I responded. I watched her shoulders stiffen. For the first time since the funeral, she appeared uncertain. I did not press further. Instead, I rose from the chair and walked toward the hallway. I will be spending more time here, I said gently. Liam should not feel as though one side of his family has vanished. Ashley did not answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice was controlled. We will discuss schedules, she said. I nodded once. Discussion. The word felt more accurate now. I stepped back onto the porch, inhaling the crisp September air. The maple tree rustled above me, its leaves brighter than they had been days before. Nothing dramatic had occurred inside that house. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Only clarity. Ashley had believed she was moving forward alone. She now understood that every step required acknowledgement of my presence. I did not need to threaten. I did not need to argue. I simply needed to remain. And sometimes remaining is the most powerful decision of all. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary on the surface. I arrived at the house every afternoon at 3:30, just in time to greet Liam when the school bus stopped at the corner. He would hop down the steps with his backpack hanging crookedly from one shoulder, scanning the yard before spotting me on the porch. The first time he saw me there, his face lit up in a way that nearly unraveled me. "Grandma," he called, running up the walkway. I knelt carefully and opened my arms. He smelled like pencil shavings and cafeteria pizza. The simple sense of childhood. Ashley watched from the kitchen window, her expression unreadable. I did not wave at her. I focused on Liam. Inside, I helped him with his homework at the dining table that still bore faint marks from Daniel's childhood science projects. Math worksheets. Spelling lists. Small steady tasks. Stability does not require grand gestures. It requires repetition. One afternoon, as Liam practiced his multiplication tables, Ashley entered the room holding a stack of printed papers. "The real estate agent would like to schedule photographs," she said evenly. I glanced at the papers but did not reach for them. "That will not be happening," I replied. She set the stack down on the table beside Liam's workbook. "You cannot stall forever," she said. I looked at my grandson. "Liam, why do not? You take a short break and grab a snack," I suggested gently. He nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. When we were alone, I folded my hands in front of me. "I am not stalling," I said calmly. "I am preserving what Daniel established." Ashley exhaled sharply. "You are interfering," she insisted. I met her gaze without raising my voice. "Interference implies lack of authority," I answered. "That is not the case." She picked up the papers again, her movements tighter than before. "I have already paid a deposit," she said. "That was premature," I replied. The word hung in the air between us. Premature. Not hostile. Not accusatory. Just accurate. Ashley studied me for a long moment. You are enjoying this, she said quietly. I felt a flicker of surprise, then a steadying calm. Enjoyment has nothing to do with it, I answered. Responsibility does. Liam returned with a glass of milk and a small plate of crackers. I shifted my attention back to him, guiding him through another set of multiplication problems as though nothing unusual had been said. Ashley remained standing for a moment longer before turning away. That evening, after Liam had gone upstairs to change for soccer practice, Ashley approached me again in the foyer. The late afternoon light streamed through the sidelights by the door, illuminating the faint outlines where family photographs had once hung. If the house cannot be sold, she said carefully, then perhaps it can be rented. Temporary income would ease things. I slipped on my coat slowly. Rental agreements also require joint approval, I replied. Her shoulders stiffened. You are making every option impossible, she said. I shook my head slightly. I am making every option deliberate, I corrected. She fell silent. For a brief moment, the confidence she had carried since the funeral seemed thinner. Not gone, just thinner. I stepped onto the porch and paused, watching Liam jog down the driveway toward the carpool that would take him to practice. His laughter drifted back toward the house. Children adapt, Ashley had said. That may be true, but adaptation should not feel like exile. As I descended the porch steps, I understood something clearly. Ashley had believed control would come quickly, like the arrival of a moving truck. Instead, she found herself slowed by structure, by documentation, by a mother who refused to disappear. I did not need to confront her daily. I only needed to remain present, consistent, and informed. The house no longer felt like a transaction waiting to be completed. It felt like a boundary being defined. And boundaries, when held quietly and without apology, can reshape an entire narrative. By the second week of October, the maple tree in the front yard had turned a deep shade of red, its leaves falling in careful spirals across the lawn. Daniel once insisted on mowing himself. I arrived one afternoon to find a different car parked in the driveway, a sleek silver sedan I did not recognize. Through the living room window, I saw Ashley seated across from a man in a tailored suit, papers spread neatly across the coffee table. Liam's backpack rested untouched by the staircase. I stepped inside without hesitation. The man stood politely as I entered. Mrs. Whitmore, Ashley said, her voice measured. This is Mr. Randall Pierce. He is advising me on financial restructuring. I inclined my head. Advising you, I repeated softly. Mr. Pierce offered a courteous smile and extended his hand. It is a pleasure to meet you, he said. We were discussing liquidity options. I removed my gloves and placed them on the console table. Liquidity suggests urgency, I observed. Ashley's eyes flickered. It suggests practicality, she corrected. I took a seat in Daniel's armchair without invitation. Practicality requires full information, I replied. Mr. Pierce glanced between us, sensing the current beneath the conversation. My understanding, he began carefully, is that the property could be leveraged to secure short-term capital. I folded my hands in my lap. Only with joint authorization, I said calmly. Ashley inhaled slowly. Margaret, this is becoming counterproductive, she said. Expenses do not pause for sentiment. I studied her face. There was strain there now, not just impatience. Then let us examine expenses, I suggested. Together. Mr. Pierce shifted slightly. Perhaps we should review the ownership structure in detail, he offered diplomatically. I looked at him directly. I already have, I said. The house cannot be sold, mortgaged, or encumbered without my written consent. That includes leveraging equity. The room grew quiet. Ashley's composure thinned further. You met with Harrison, she said flatly. I did not deny it. He has represented this family for decades, I answered. He ensures clarity. Mr. Pierce gathered his papers with deliberate calm. It appears further internal discussion is necessary, he said, rising from the sofa. Ashley did not walk him to the door. She remained standing near the coffee table, her fingers resting on the edge of the paperwork as though holding it in place. When the front door closed behind him, she turned toward me. You are undermining everything I am trying to stabilize, she said quietly. I rose from the armchair and faced her fully. Stability built on unilateral decisions is fragile, I replied. Daniel did not design fragility. Her eyes flashed briefly. Daniel trusted me to move forward, she insisted. He trusted me to safeguard continuity, I said. That includes Liam's home. At the sound of his name, she glanced toward the staircase. Liam appeared at the top step, watching us with uncertain eyes. I softened my tone immediately. Homework time, I called gently. He nodded and disappeared back into his room. Ashley lowered her voice. You cannot stay here indefinitely, she said. I held her gaze without hostility. Indefinite is not my goal, I answered. Equilibrium is. She looked at me as though searching for weakness and finding none. The house, stripped of photographs and half emptied of belongings, felt different now. Not hollow. Defined. Each boundary clearer than before. I stepped toward the window and looked out at the maple leaves scattered across the yard. Financial restructuring requires transparency, I said calmly. If there are concerns, we can review them together with Harrison present. Ashley's silence stretched longer than usual. Finally she nodded once, tight and reluctant. Fine, she said. We will schedule a meeting. I turned toward the staircase, listening to the faint scratch of Liam's pencil above us. The conversation had not been dramatic. No accusations. No raised voices. Yet something essential had shifted. Ashley understood that the house was not an asset she could quietly reshape. It was a shared responsibility. And responsibilities, when acknowledged out loud, carry weight that cannot be dismissed. I remained by the window for another moment, watching a single red leaf detach from the branch and drift slowly downward. Change was still happening. But now it moved on terms neither of us could ignore. The meeting with Harrison was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 11 in the morning. The leaves outside Daniel's house had thinned, exposing more of the pale autumn sky, and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. Ashley arrived at the office precisely on time, dressed in a tailored navy coat, her posture straight and composed. I was already seated across from Harrison's desk when she entered. She acknowledged me with a brief nod before taking the chair beside me. Harrison greeted us both with the same calm professionalism he had maintained for decades. He opened Daniel's file without ceremony and began reviewing the relevant provisions aloud. The language was precise. The ownership structure was explicit. Joint tenancy with survivorship considerations and conditional consent requirements for any major financial action involving the primary residence. Ashley listened without interruption at first, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When Harrison finished outlining the constraints, she cleared her throat softly. Daniel did not explain that level of restriction to me, she said. Harrison met her gaze steadily. He believed transparency would prevent conflict, he replied. I remained silent, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. Ashley shifted slightly in her seat. What options remain? She asked. Harrison answered evenly. Collaborative decisions. Mediation if necessary. Or maintaining the property for Liam's long-term stability, as specified. The mention of Liam altered the atmosphere subtly. Ashley's composure wavered for a brief second before returning. I am not attempting to destabilize my son, she said carefully. I turned toward her, my voice measured. Then let us align our actions with that intention. There was no accusation in my tone. Only clarity. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering financial projections, maintenance costs, and educational planning for Liam. When we stood to leave, Ashley did not look defeated. She looked recalibrated. Outside on Main Street, the midday sun cast clean shadows across the sidewalk. She paused beside her car before speaking. I did not expect resistance, she admitted quietly. I studied her face, seeing not cruelty but urgency layered with grief. You expected absence, I corrected gently. She did not deny it. For a moment the sharpness between us softened. I cannot lose everything at once, she said, her voice lower than before. I understood that sentence more than she realized. You are not, I replied. But neither am I. We stood there in silence, the city moving steadily around us. No raised voices.
No dramatic declarations.
Just two women bound by the same loss, negotiating the boundaries of what remained. In the weeks that followed, the house was not listed for sale. The real estate agent was informed that the timing was premature. Liam continued his routine without disruption. I maintained my afternoons at the dining table, guiding him through homework and listening to his stories about recess and science class. Ashley and I established a schedule, formal but functional. Decisions were discussed before they were made. Documents were shared before they were signed. The tension did not vanish overnight, but it changed shape. It became structured. One evening, as I prepared to leave after helping Liam practice for a spelling test, Ashley walked me to the porch. The maple tree was nearly bare now, its branches outlined against a darkening sky. "I was harsh," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. I did not force her to elaborate. "Grief distorts language," I answered. She nodded once. There was no apology wrapped in elaborate phrasing, no dramatic reconciliation, only acknowledgement. I stepped down the porch steps and paused, looking back at the house Daniel had loved. The windows glowed warmly from within. It no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a place reclaimed through steadiness rather than confrontation. I understood then that strength does not require spectacle. It requires endurance. Daniel had trusted that I would see further. He had been right. I had not needed to shout to be heard. I had not needed to disappear to preserve dignity. I simply remained. And in remaining, I ensured that neither my son's legacy nor my place within it could be quietly erased.